Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you found this helpful, please do hit the like button. Subscriptions are great, but the more times I can get people to hit that like button, the more it makes me want to do videos like this. So if you have a Ram pickup truck and you're watching this, man, are you going to enjoy this video. If you like anything nice for your truck, the Banks Preformance differential cover is probably the best, the absolute best part you could put on your truck, especially if you tow. But talk about eye candy looking up underneath your truck and seeing that Banks Preformance rear differential cover. Yeah, nothing is better, right? So what we're doing first is we're going to drop our sway bar out of the way. So you do have to buy the spacers when you buy your Banks rear differential cover. Just go ahead, spend up the money. I'm not sure why Banks doesn't just throw a couple of those spacers in the box. The cover cost enough money that that aluminum spacer that they throw in, or that you have to buy, I think it was $39 for the spacer and 4 bolts. But go ahead and buy yours. Maybe somebody at Banks will see this video and they'll say, hey, there's enough Ram owners that want these spacers just thrown in the box. We're going to do that. I doubt it, because that's not how our society works. And good on Banks. You know what? They need to make some money. And I'm okay throwing an extra few dollars at them for those spacers. Because when you see the end result of this differential cover on the back of your truck, yeah, you're gonna fall in love with your truck all over again. Even if nobody else gets to see it, just you. At least you know it's back there. So we've removed these 4 bolts that hold our sway bar on, and then just give your sway bar a really good tug. The only thing holding your sway bar onto the axles is going to be rust, dirt, debris, grime. This truck is a 2022 Ram 2500 with the 6.7 liter Cummins engine. I don't plan to tow a lot, but I do plan to tow. And there was just a quick shot of what your spacer looks like. And don't put your spacers in yet. Do the spacers last before you put the oil in. With that sway bar out of the way, it makes it so much easier to get to these bolts that hold your rear differential cover on. These are 13 millimeter bolts, and the sway bar is held on by 15 millimeter bolts. And when you put it all back together again, the sway bar is going to take 14 millimeter bolts, and the differential cover is going to take 10 millimeter. And with the Banks instructions, they give you all your torque specs and everything. So don't beat me up for not giving you torque specs. Now the bolts you see me working on right now, there's 3 of them, and it's kind of like a bolt and a stud all built into one, and it holds your brake line in place, and it holds the right side rear brake line and a wiring harness. You can kind of see a silver little cap washer on the right of the differential cover. But these are a pain in the butt. These are bad, folks. Let me tell you, these are bad. When I pulled mine out, they had red Loctite on them. That's how bad they are, and you can't get to them with a ratchet. So I'm using a ratcheting wrench, like a gear wrench, So I just have a 13 millimeter wrench that's hooked up onto it, and once you get it started, it goes, but it looks like I'm zipping right through it. I am not. I'm fighting that wrench the whole way. And then you have a heat shield that's up there. There's a heat shield that protects your spare tire, and it's sharp. It could cut you wide open. Wear gloves. Listen to me. Always wear gloves anyway. Anytime you're working on your vehicle, wear gloves. Wear latex gloves, some kind of gloves to keep the chemicals off of you. There are no chemicals that are in your car that are good for your body. Not even that plastic bottle of water that's sitting in the door. So just keep that in mind, that you don't want to get these chemicals on you. Um, but it is going to be some work to get 3 of these bolts out of here. This one's a pain in the butt too, and I just took a pair of vice grips and I worked it off. You do not have to save any of these bolts. You can jump on eBay and see what I did with my bolts, because this rear differential cover and all the bolts that I took off will be in the same for sale ad. But this one was the hardest one to get off right here. Just fighting this thing. It wanted to come off, but then it didn't want to come off, and then it wanted to come off, and it fought me pretty good. I should have just gave it a big tug and just destroyed it. But unlike you, I did not read my instructions from Banks Performance until about the end of the install. But you see it's coming. I also want you to see that oil is dripping out of this differential. So always loosen the bottom bolts first and get your pan underneath the differential to catch all that gear oil. And by the time you're done, your rear differential will pretty much be drained, right? There's like a little puddle in mine, and that's only because I have the back of the truck up in the air. But I'm telling you right now, that bolt that I'm working on at the top of the differential, that couldn't have been harder to get to. And I have some better tools than this. I have some of those old, and that's probably what would have worked great. But I have those old Craftsman. Craftsman used to make a wrench. It was a ratcheting socket looking thing, and it's actually pretty nice. I use it every now and then, but I didn't think about it on this one. Shoot, I don't even know which toolbox that would be in. But I have a set of those. I might have a couple sets of those in the same toolbox. But they were some sockets that fit inside the wrench handle. And they had a nice long handle to them, so you could actually get some torque on that handle when you're trying to break some of these free. This was bad. Those three were bad. The rest of them not so bad, but the red Loctite's what did it. Each one of them, when I pulled it out, just red Loctite all over the end. So you want to get all of the difficult bolts off of your differential cover first. Leave the two most easiest bolts for last. You'll thank me later. So now you really see the oil dripping out of it, and you see that it's the wrong color. Like I said, this truck has 36,000 miles on it, and that gear oil is the wrong color. You see how dark brown it is. So I'm not sure what Stellantis put in this thing at the factory. I would be curious, if you're doing this job, I'd be curious to know what color your oil was when you drained it and how many miles. If you watch my other video where I replaced the transmission pan, I put a Mag High-Tech transmission pan on it. My transmission oil looked pretty bad when I drained it out. It was not the pretty pink color that was in the containers that I was pouring back in it at the end of the job. But I will tell you, my truck shifts so much nicer now with the new transmission fluid in it. So if you're considering waiting till your 60,000 mile service to replace your automatic transmission fluid, go ahead and do it early. I usually swap the fluids out in my vehicles every 30,000 miles. I usually do the engine oil at 3,000 miles. But this truck, because RPMs are so low, I think I'm going to go with every 5,000 miles I'll do an oil change. I want to keep this truck for at least the next 15 years. Then by that time I'll be 70 and I'll be too old to care about what my truck can pull. I'm not going to be pulling equipment when I'm 70 years old. I'm sorry, guys. I shouldn't be pulling equipment now, but I do. It's fun, right? I do it more for a hobby. I can't think of anything better than jumping in a skid steer or an excavator and beating up the dirt. Something about that makes you feel good. If you have a skid steer or excavator, you absolutely know what I'm talking about. There's just something relaxing about digging dirt. So you see at this point, pretty much all the oil's out. There's a little bit of a puddle up inside that differential. What I did was I just took a towel, a rag, and I put it up underneath the gear and pulled it all to the back of the truck and let it fall into my pan. This rear differential I thought was going to be a lot easier than the front. If you decide to do your front, I have a video on that one also. The front one, you can probably knock the front out in about a half hour or less. This rear one took me about an hour. And mainly it was because some of these bolts were just really, really hard to get to. And if you got man-sized hands, you know what I'm talking about, some jobs, right? But there you go, your cover's off. There's that last screw. See, the last screw is the easiest screw. You always want the easiest screw to be last. And then your old cover and gasket just drop right off. So this is what it looks like. That's what your gears look like. My gears look pretty good. Other than the oil being dark, the differential looked pretty good. The magnet didn't have crap all on it. I do wish they would put a magnet at the bottom of the pan. I wish they'd put a drain plug and a magnet at the bottom of that cover. That would be just so much more efficient, I think. So here's a beautiful Banks rear differential cover. I mean, that thing just looks great, doesn't it? And I stepped up and I bought the black one. It's called Black with Machine. They have a plain aluminum one, and then they have a completely all black one. And if you're 2500 or you're 3500, probably even your 5500, if it sits as tall as my truck does, small cars sitting behind you at the red light are absolutely going to be able to see Banks underneath the truck. I've got a 25,000 pound hitch on the back of my truck, and it's ginormous. But you can still see that Banks. You can see the Banks Performance differential cover past that big old hitch. You see that hitch right there? That is a big hitch. That hitch is so big it sets off the backup alarm. But I would rather have the backup alarm going off than take that hitch off, because if you run up behind me and you rear end me, I would rather have my hitch destroying the front end of your car than you hitting my bumper and me having to replace my bumper. Well, your insurance company would have to replace my bumper, but chances are, if the person's running into the back of your car, they don't have insurance, right? And in today's world, people just aren't responsible. So I'm putting in all the plugs. It's got a sight glass. You saw me put the sight glass in. Then it had another plug for something that I don't know. And then I went ahead and I put the drain plug in. I'm not going to put the fill cap in until last. But here's a little thing of blue Loctite that they give you. And then they give you this rubber grommet that you need to put into the little cut that's in the differential. You are going to do this twice, just like I did. So watch carefully. Once I get this entire gasket into place, this little seal O-ring, there's about 2 inches left over. You're going to have the same issue, and I did not stretch it. All I did was pushed it into the gap, and I have about 2 inches right there. If you can see past my left hand that's in the way, there's about 2 inches. So now I have it in, and I'm going to reinsert it, pushing it back against itself, and that's also going to make the seal thicker. But whatever you do, if you're having problems at this point right here, just stop what you're doing, go get a Coke, take a break, whatever. Do not have the genius bonehead idea to cut this O-ring. Do not cut this O-ring. It will fit. It will fit. Banks wouldn't have given you this O-ring in one piece if they didn't think it would fit. And you see I'm close right now. As I work my way around, it's all going to fall right into that little gap. Do not cut this O-ring. I know one of you guys is watching this video and you've already cut your O-ring. Don't do it. Don't do it. Gear oil might be thick, but I promise you, you cut that O-ring, you're going to be spewing gear oil all over the highways. Even if you cut it at the top, gear oil is coming out. So don't cut it. So here's our 10 millimeter bolts that they provide. So I always like to count how many holes are in the differential. And then I count my bolts to make sure that I have the proper amount before I climb underneath the truck. I got a friend of mine who's about 10 years older than I am. And he always says the best exercise for old people is getting on the ground and just getting back up. It prepares you for when you fall down. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I find myself getting on the ground quite a bit to get underneath vehicles. I'm glad I can still do it. So here we go. So I just put the pan on the ground. I got up underneath. I do have my blue Loctite with me. I don't think it's Loctite that they give you. It's some other blue, bolt Loctite kind of adhesive. But you do want to use it. You want to put a little bit on each one. And I did use red Loctite on the sway bar. When I put the clamps in and the bolts for the sway bars, I did use red Loctite. Some people think that red Loctite, you can't get it off once it's, you can't get the bolt out once it's on, and that's just false. It just takes more torque to get the bolt out. The bolt will come out with red Loctite. So this thing weighs about 12 to 14 pounds. And it wasn't too difficult to do it by myself. Having a friend, I don't really have any friends, so I couldn't ask somebody to help me. But you just saw right there, once you get one of those bolts started, it kind of holds it up in the air so you can get the next one in. I always like to do one side and then pop over and get the other side. That way, when you start putting them in, the rest of them in, it'll pretty much already be lined up. And I'm not tightening anything down right now. I'm just running that bolt in so the gap between the differential and the differential cover isn't great. I only want enough gap so that differential cover will slide side to side, up and down, so I can get each and every one of those bolts in. And I'm not going to tighten up any of these bolts until the very end. So you see me putting the blue Loctite stuff on there. Pretty self-explanatory. And in your kit, there's actually going to be a metal wire. It's one of those wire clamps. And that's what you're going to use for your brake line. So on that right side where there was a plastic clamp holding your brake line into place, Banks provided you with a metal one. That way you can torque down that bolt and it won't smash the plastic. Whereas Dodge had that stud thing, that stud bolt kind of thing going on. Nonsense. But look how good that differential cover looks. So again, I'm just putting the screws in there just tight enough, and the two that are up top that hold your brake lines in place, those are those are pretty hard to get in. So those two didn't get torqued, and there's one other one that's up top there that I wasn't able to get torqued down. I just torqued it tight with hand. I couldn't get in there with the torque wrench, so they didn't get torqued. But the two that I'm working on right now, you're going to have the same issue I had getting these bolts into place because of the red Loctite that's in those threads from the factory. Ideally, if that other sway bar or torsion bar or whatever that is that's in front of the spare tire, if that weren't there, you could probably put a thread chaser in there and clean those threads out. But the space is just so tight, you're just going to have to deal with it. Get the bolt in there finger tight, and then put your wrench on the end and just work it in. So we almost got all these screws in place. And like I said, this is going to take you about an hour. It's going to take you about an hour to get this cover on. It's going to take you a few minutes to pour gear oil all over your garage floor. Leave your oil pan under the differential until you're completely done. Because I use those, when I put the oil in, I use those squeezable little jugs, those Valvoline squeeze. It took me 4.5 quarts. But I figure I used 5 quarts completely, but I'm pretty sure I put at least half a quart on the differential cover and on the floor. Well, not on the floor, but in my pan underneath my differential cover. When I go to change this, I know in the future I'll use a Lubrimatic pump, and instead of me trying to use those little squeeze bottles, I'll just get the regular quart containers of gear oil and just manually pump it into the differential. It'll be a lot cleaner. I won't have as much wasted or spillage. Right now I'm just tightening down. I'm just tightening down each one of these bolts with a ratchet. And now I'm going to come back with my torque wrench. And off the top of my head, I don't remember what the torque spec was for each one of these. But I set I set it, and then I just torqued down each one with the torque wrench. There were three on the very top that I couldn't get to with the torque wrench. So I just did those with the regular wrench. Just remember, leave that sway bar hanging. It's so much easier to do this if you put those spacers on last. That sway bar is still kind of in the way. It sucks, but what are you going to do? I can think of worse things. I can think of worse cars that I've worked on where getting a cover off was just a pain in the butt. There was too much stuff in the way. One offhand is the transmission on a C6 or the C7 Corvette, where you actually have to remove bolts, loosen bolts that hold the transmission into place, and then jack the transmission up so you can get to the pan bolts with the universal to take them out. So this right here isn't, this is not the worst that I've seen. This was actually an easy job. It was just a little bit time consuming. It was more time consuming than I thought it would be. And you can absolutely see how bad I'm suffering right now trying to get those bolts into place. And when you're holding them bolts in your hand, they don't seem like they're that long until you get them into a tight location where you can only make like a quarter of a turn, and then that quarter of a turn is just filled full of red Loctite from the bolt that was in there before. And you can also, on the top of the screen, if you're seeing it, you can also see that aluminum heat shield that protects the exhaust from burning up your spare tire. That heat shield, if you've ever worked on a vehicle, you know how sharp those heat shields are. They're very sharp. They will cut you. Again, gloves are your friend. Okay, officially your differential cover is on. So here I'm putting a squirt of red Loctite. On the two bolts that hold your sway bar into place. And then just put those bolts in the little U coupler that's there. And then you're going to have to force that sway bar up into place. This part of it is not a lot of fun. That sway bar is heavier than it looks. If we're lucky with that red Loctite on there, we never have to take the sway bar off again. I was looking up at the suspension on this truck. I have the airbags on my truck. I don't know what you have, but I was looking at the shocks, the Mopar shocks that are up underneath this truck, and I was thinking how nice it would be, how nice it would look if I replaced those black Mopar shocks with the machined aluminum Bilstein 5100 shocks. And that might be in my future. It's not necessary, but those Bilsteins sure look good, don't they? And it looks like they're pretty easy and straightforward to put on this thing. It looks like the old shock just unbolts from the truck, and the new one just slides into place and bolts up. I did a 250 not too long ago. I put Bilsteins on all four corners. And I'm going to say it took me about an hour, about 15 minutes per corner to put the shocks on. And the guy who owned the truck said his truck handled so much better afterwards. It didn't bounce down the highway like it did before. But there it is right there. I mean, there's your differential cover. And then here's me pouring Valvoline gear oil all over everything. All over everything. So I used these little squeeze bottles. I used 5 of them completely. And my oil level is just a little bit higher than what's in the sight glass. I think in the sight glass you should have like a little clear bubble at the top or be in the middle of the sight glass. I'm okay putting too much oil into a differential as long as it's not, as long as it's not completely filled all the way over the top. But I am past my sight glass. And it's probably even higher once I drop the truck down, just because right now filling it up, everything's going to the front of the differential. But again, I was right at 5 quarts, but you see how much oil is dripping. So I figure I wasted easily half a quart, a pint of gear oil. This was messy. And next time I'll just use a Lubrimatic pump, and I'll just pump the gear oil in. So we're putting the gear oil plug back in the top. This, I believe, was a 14 millimeter. You can't get in there with the ratchet, so I had to go grab a wrench to do this with. But now you've watched my video of how to put a Banks Performance rear differential cover on your Ram. I hope this helped you out. I hope you didn't mind me rambling too much. But you got to admit, that looks good. That looks really good. And no, Banks does not sponsor me in any way. But thanks for watching.